This is Working Wooden Planes. I'm Abraham. I take antique planes and get them back into working condition. If you like these videos I do, if you like these wooden plane videos, do the whole like, subscribe thing. It's really awesome to see that other people are as into this as I am. Today we've got a troubleshooting video. If you have a wood plane, maybe you got it at a estate sale or at an antique fair or online. You get it home, you sharpen it, it's razor sharp, but it's just still not performing the way that it should. Maybe it is one of the things that we're going to touch on today. I'll hit on them pretty quick. Hopefully they're helpful and can get you get your plane to where you want it to be. So we're going to do, first off, we're going to look at just real basic. We're just going to set up the iron. Number two, we're going to look at jamming. Jamming can happen to anybody, even if you're really experienced. We'll look at tearouts, how to prevent tearouts, iron chatter, and then real briefly we'll touch on lapping the sole. So let's get to it. So first off, setup. This is the way I do it. There's a couple different ways to set up a wooden plane, a jack plane, a smoothing plane. I'll show you my method. One of the first things you want to do is you want to check the relationship between the iron and the chip breaker. You only want to have a tiny bit of you only want the iron to extend beyond the chip breaker a tiny bit. For a jack plane, we're talking about like a 1/16 of an inch, and for a smoothing plane, maybe down even to like a 32nd. Doesn't have to be exact. We're talking about just estimating it. But that size, that tiny little edge right there is the thickness of your shaving. So in most cases you're going to want to try, like I said, for either that 1/16 of an inch or that 32nd of an inch, somewhere right around in there. Once you have that set, you're going to set it down on your workbench. You're going to take the iron, you're going to let it sit so that the edge of the iron touches the workbench. You're going to put your wedge in, then you're going to pull back. You're going to pull back on your iron just the tiniest bit, just a couple millimeters, just a couple fractions of an inch. You shouldn't be able to feel it through the mouth. If you do, pull it back a little bit more and just get your wedge finger tight. You don't need to use your mallet on it quite yet. But once you have that backed off and you have the wedge finger tight, you're gonna look down the sole of the plane and what you're looking for is just the tiniest bit of the iron to peek through and show through the mouth. Once you have that, I think you should be able to just see that right like there. One of the biggest problems I think people have when they first start using wooden planes is they just advance the iron too far through the mouth. So once I've got that, then I'm going to set the wedge, give it a couple good wraps, and you'll see that even with just the tiniest bit of that iron showing, I'm still getting way too deep of a cut. I mean, that's just tearing up the wood, tearing those shavings off. So we're going to back it off a little bit. I'm going to try it again. Oh, backed it off too much. So I'm going to advance it again. Give it a couple taps, set that wedge. And this is how you set the iron when you're first starting. Once you get experienced at this, it takes a lot fewer steps. but once you're first doing this, it's a little bit of back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until you get the iron exactly where you need it to be, get the shavings exactly where you need it to be. So one of the things you might run into right off the bat, this is really common, is seeing steps in your work surface, in the board that you're working on. So there's those little raised areas that are running parallel in line with where you're planing. There's two different reasons you might get those. One of them is just that your lateral adjustment is off, so that in other words, one corner of the blade is set too deep, and even just a couple, a millimeter or two will create those steps. It's really easy to fix. You're gonna adjust the iron so that it's coming out of the mouth totally perpendicular with the sole of the plane. The other problem might be that the iron itself is shaped incorrectly. So you're either going to want to put a camber on the iron, or you're going to want to round off the corners, or actually you're going to want to do both. Rounding off the corners is pretty simple. We'll get to that in a second. Putting a camber on it means putting a slight arc to the blade, and you can see that this smoothing plane iron has a very slight camber on it. It's really easy to do. The reason you want to do it is to keep the edges from gouging the board, obviously. So you want the center to be a little bit higher than the corners. This is a scrub plane from an earlier video that I did. It's got a really exaggerated camber on it. I just want to show you so you can see what a real big camber looks like. They're really easy to do. This is when I was sharpening that scrub plane iron. You want to do 5 or 10 strokes, let's say, on the left side, 5 strokes in the center, 10 strokes on the right side, 5 strokes in the center, back and forth and back and forth, and pretty quickly you'll be able to get a great arc on your iron, a great camber on your iron, and that should take care of those steps. When it comes to rounding off the corners, you really just need to take a file and hit the corners, 2 or 3 strokes. You're not trying to really take a lot off. You just want to make sure that it's not razor sharp on the corners anymore. There's just a little bit of round them off just a little bit. All right, moving on to jamming. Trying to get this to jam. I didn't do a very good job. Jamming is obviously when material gets impacted in the mouth of the plane, and you can't keep planing because shavings are not getting ejected. It can happen for 2 different reasons. One of them is a problem with the mouth, and one of them is a problem with the chip breaker. If your mouth is too narrow, then it's going to jam. And when I'm talking about the mouth in this case, I'm not talking about the overall size of the mouth. I'm talking about the space, the gap between the leading edge of the iron and the front of the mouth itself. And if that is too narrow, then like I said, you're going to get jams. What's the correct gap? Well, it should be around maybe a 1/16 of an inch for a jack plane, around a 32nd inch for a smoothing plane. But those are not set in stone. That's just sort of a rough estimate. Your own plane may require something different than that. So it's something that you just need to adjust and figure out. If by advancing your iron to where you think it's actually getting a decent shaving, but you're still getting jamming, then you just need to file the front of the mouth a little bit and increase the gap till it's at the correct space. if you're these old planes, that's almost never an issue. That's almost never a problem. The problem is usually how far you've advanced your iron. The second problem can be from the chip breaker. If you hold up your iron and the chip breaker and look at the chip breaker, the space between where the chip breaker and the iron meet, there should be no gaps in there. This is another common place for jamming to occur, and material gets stuck in between the gap between the iron and the chip breaker. The way to solve that problem is, first off, you're going to want to make sure that the back of your iron is flat, which you should have done when you sharpened it. But you also want to make sure that the leading edge of the chip breaker is also flat. This is a little illustration from Scott Wynn's book, what's it called? Oh, Traditional Wooden Hand Planes. And it's a really good it's just a really good illustration of how you position the chip breaker to get a good flat surface. You want there to be a seamless marriage between the iron and the chip breaker. Okay, tearouts. If you've made it this long, thanks for watching. Tearouts are really ugly. It's where the iron is tearing the wood fibers instead of cutting them. There's two main reasons that this can happen. One of them is just that you are not reading the wood correctly and you are planing against the grain. One of the basic fundamentals of planing is that you plane with the grain, not against the grain. If you don't do that, very common problem is getting tearouts. The second reason you can get tearouts, and this is the flip side of the jamming, and it's that your mouth is too wide. So the overall size of the mouth is too big, and because of that, you are not able to advance the iron up to that 16th or 32nd or whatever. And instead it's like open like a 1/8 of an inch or something like that, and you're going to get tearouts from that as well. The only way to solve that problem is to do a throat insert or a mouth insert and narrow that down. This is a little clip from a video I did where I replaced one. This is an involved process. I'm not going to get into it in this video. If your throat or the mouth is too big, if the throat is too big, this is the only way to solve that problem, and that'll be a future video. But for now, if you're getting tearouts, know that this might be the reason for that. Now we come to chatter. I really love talking about chatter because it's not something that a lot of people seem to know about, and it can make a huge difference in the performance of your plane. So ideally what we're trying to do is avoid any play between the components of the plane, so the iron and the wedge and the body. And if that's not occurring, if that's not happening, if it's not secure, then the iron will move around a bit, and you're going to get these ridges on your shavings. And this is a clip from another video that I did a little while back. You can see how the plane is just kind of bucking around, and you can see in the shavings that the ridging that I was talking about. You're not getting a smooth shaving. So you want to make sure that you are your wedge is secure. You want to make sure that the screw head for the chip breaker is not getting hung up on anything, and you want to make sure that the entire throat is totally flat. What you want is you're not going to get total contact along the entire throat, You want to make sure that you're getting full contact at the top of the throat and at the top or the opening of the mouth down there. What you don't want is any high points in between, because then it's going to start to move back and forth as you try to plane. There's a couple different ways that you can try and find those high spots. One of them is to cover the front of the iron in graphite or something like candle smoke. And then what you're going to do is slide that iron into place. You're going to put the wedge in just finger tight, and you're going to just move the iron around a tiny bit. And what you're trying to do is get those high spots to scuff whatever the material is that you've covered it with. When you pull it back out gently, you should see that there are, like I said, scuff marks where it's making contact. If you're seeing little high points at various places on your iron, so then you're going to just take a file and in the throat knock down those high spots. I mean, I suppose you could use a chisel as well if they're really dramatic. But I've just, the only thing that I've ever done, I've just used a file, and it's been very successful. It's worked totally fine. And that will take care of your chatter. So lastly, let's talk real briefly about flattening the sole of the plane, lapping the sole. If it's out of alignment, if it's skewed, if it has high points, you may not notice that in the performance of the plane, but you may see that in your work. You may see high spots and low spots where there should be nothing but flatness. So it's very easy to check. You just take a square, run it along the sole of the plane. You're looking for high spots. You're looking to see if the entire thing is in alignment. If not, it's an easy fix. You're just going to take a hard surface. I just use a tile and some sandpaper, and you're going to just run it along there and knock down those high spots. One of the reasons I wanted to include this is that I've been doing it wrong in my earlier videos, and you really should have the iron and wedge in place when you lap the sole. So I just wanted to include that real quickly and say don't do it the way that I was doing it. So that's it. Hopefully some of those tips will be helpful for you. Hopefully they might help fix some of the problems you have with your plane. You now know as much about troubleshooting as I do. Hope that helps. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.